Peace, and welcome. We're glad you're here. This is the Cook on Monday Morning podcast. I am here with the lovely, the brilliant, one of the people
keep going.
one of the people that, one of my most trusted political confidants, a woman that I've looked up to for a very long time, that I think our city should be honored to be connected to, Miss Sophie Maxwell.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. At Cook on Monday Morning, we believe that if you own Monday morning, you can own the week. If you own the week, you can own the year. And if you change your year, you can change your life. Miss Maxwell is one of the former supervisors of San Francisco. She's currently running for the DCCC. This is going to be her second term once she wins on March 3rd. And she and her family have been true servants to the city of San Francisco. So I'm excited to get into your story, to hear about the lessons you learned along the way, to hopefully impart some wisdom about what San Francisco can be doing better. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So where do we begin? You were serving as supervisor in San Francisco from which years?
2001 to 2011.
Okay. And what was that initial race like? Like, were you appointed? Did you win? What happened?
Well, this was a time when we went back to district elections.
Okay.
After an incident that many people know about with Harvey Milk killing our loved and respected mayor and supervisor. Mm-hmm. And people said, okay, no more district elections for a while. So we went back to district elections, and this was the first time. So it was really exciting because a lot of the candidates at that time were all kind of activists. They'd been active in their community. They weren't lawyers. They weren't trying to facilitate anything. They were just working in their community. And there were a lot of things that we wanted to work on and a lot of things that we wanted to change. Mm-hmm.
And so how crowded was your initial race? Like, how many people were running?
Well, in my initial race, I think there might have been 7 or 8. And at least 5 of those people were Black women. Yeah, it's great.
And before you ran, you were you are an electrician.
Yeah, I was an electrician. I maintained and repaired the electrical systems on trains, and I also had my own general contractor's license, and I did some work on the side. A lot of people know about side jobs.
Right. How did you get into that trade? Well,
it was a time when it was women in non-traditional jobs. And so I'd always seen all these men, coming in out of our house. My father was a general contractor. And the cleanest ones, they made really, really good money. And the cleanest ones were the electricians. And I always liked math. And I thought, you know what, my nails could grow and I could have a lot of money and I was married at the time. And my husband was a teacher. And when I told him I wanted to do this, he said, "Are you out of your mind? I'm going to be a teacher and you're going to be an electrician? How is that going to look?" But little did he know that I was contemplating getting a divorce anyway. And so these were part of my plans. And I was going to be making more money as an apprentice than he was as a teacher. So I continued my plans, and consequently we got the divorce and I became an electrician.
But you also grew up in the city, right?
Yes, born and raised.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Herbert Hoover Junior High School. I went to, LeConte, which is now something else. It was on Cesar Chavez.
Okay.
And I went to Poly for a minute, and then I went away to boarding school in Utah.
Oh, wow.
Of all places.
Where in Utah?
Around right outside of Provo.
Okay.
Provo, Utah. It was called Mount Pleasant, Utah. And there was a Presbyterian boarding school there, and my mother was a Presbyterian minister, so I went.
Yeah, and your mother has a very important legacy. We have a school named after her.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about who your mother was and the type of work she did.
My mother was Enola Maxwell, Nola D. Maxwell, and she was a brilliant woman. She was a little woman. She was about maybe 5 feet and maybe 98 pounds, but she carried a big stick. She was brilliant. She was smart, really enjoyed math and thought very logically. I mean, she looked at things from a very logical perspective. And I remember one time we were out, she was speaking somewhere, and she said it was with the firemen, and they were trying to integrate the fire department. And she said, well, who do you think puts out the fires in China and Japan? Because they were saying they were too short. She just hit the nail right on the head.
Right.
So that was my mother.
Yeah. So you picked up some qualities from her. So you mentioned you love math. You said that she loved math.
Yeah, my father did too. So.
Oh, both of them. And you all were both committed to community service. It sounds like it was very involved household. What was that? What was your upbringing like?
Well, during that time, it was the civil rights time. It was marching, Martin Luther King. We were marching for school integration, cab integration, so Black people could sell Cadillacs. We were driving them. So it was just during that time that it was a social revolution. And so we were a part of that. And my mother and my grandmother were on the line for cabs and yellow cabs and Cadillacs and at the Board of Education. That's just what we did.
What was San Francisco like for what did the Black community look like in San Francisco when you were growing up?
Well, what I remember is it was big. We had everybody, lawyers and doctors, many lawyers, many doctors, Willie Brown, and a whole lot of people were like that, and communities all over. In the Fillmore, in the Haight Ashbury, it was hustling and bustling, and we had businesses. You would go down on Fillmore Street, and there were fish businesses and other products that Black people liked, and there were nightclubs. Social life was big then. Yeah, lots of families, lots of people.
Did you grow up in the Fillmore?
No, I grew up kind of we started off in the Carolina Projects, which is where my mother's school is now. Okay. There were projects there on Potrero Hill. Okay. And then my mother and grandmother bought a house in the Mission District. And then they bought another house in the Haight Ashbury District when I was about 12, 13. So, that's kind of where I grew up, I think, is basically in the Haight Ashbury. Right.
Do you have siblings?
Yeah, I have a brother. I had a brother. He died. He was about 10 years older, and a sister who's 12 years older. Okay. So the three of you are growing up in this time in the city where there was a lot of Black professionals, a lot of activism. Yes. And you had parents that were very involved in helping shape San Francisco. Yes, active. Yeah. And so, what were some of like the main lessons that you remember your parents really pushing as you guys were growing up? Civic responsibility. That if you want change, you have to be a part of that change. You can't just sit back and blame other people. Right. Engagement and tolerance and love and understanding and respect. When I've been thinking a lot about this neighborhood. We're in Hayes Valley right now, and I've been thinking a lot about the Fillmore corridor. And I want to get into a lot of San Francisco issues as we talk today. I want to talk about the issues that you championed and you advanced. May I just say one more thing that my mother taught me that, and she said, if there are any superior people on the face of this earth, she said, now mind you, I'm saying if, you are a part of that group, and don't you ever forget that. And so that really helped, that you stand tall and straight. Right. I feel like I gotta say amen. Something like that. Yeah. That's a powerful message. So you grew up like seeing people actively improve the city, yes. And when you talked about all of the Black businesses that used to be a part of sort of this area of the city and other areas of the city, what do you think the city would need to do, or if it's possible to recreate that? Like, what role would the city have to play? Well, I think being open to it and projecting the desire and want, it's little things. Like when you put out, when you ask people to come to your city, the Chamber of Commerce, that when somebody looks at businesses, they see Black businesses and Asian businesses and Latin businesses, Latinx businesses, not just one group.
Right.
I mean, there's messages. And when you send out a message that's all one group, people get it. So if you want integration, if you want different businesses, you do that. I mean, we had real estate businesses. We had insurance businesses. So, it wasn't just about cutting hair. It was all the other things that go with that.
Right. Yeah. Every aspect of anything, any type of service you would need.
Yeah. Big real estate people that were doing and helped you get money and helped you get loans and showed you how to do that and how to claim your rings, as part of what you have,
Yeah. And so when you saw all this stuff, very important things to see. You got some important messages. You started a career. You went into a career as an electrician, and then you decided to run for office. How did your family respond when you first said you were going to go do this?
Well, I said, Mom, can you see me being an electrician on a train? She said, Sophie, I can see you being an electrician anywhere or anything else you want to be. Just nip that in the bud. Plus, I had my son, my child at that time, and I wanted to live, not just survive. I wanted to be able to buy a house and a car and do things. And that's what I saw these men doing. They were living a good life, and I decided that I could do that. Right.
And so when you decided to run for office,
when I decided to run for office, I had been involved. I was living then, we had bought another house in the Bayview. And so I had been living there for a while. And my son had cancer. And it just kind of threw me for a loop for a minute. And then I just got busy doing something about it. And I ran for the PAC, which was the Project Area Committee, which was a part of the redevelopment. Whenever there was going to be a redevelopment area, after what they did to the Fillmore, there had to be a lot of community input and there had to be community involvement, and you had to run for a board. And so I did. And that kind of spurred me on to try to clean up and get rid of the PG&E wanted to build another and bigger power plant at the time. So I got busy trying to work against that and got involved with a lot of people. And with the Project Area Committee, we had plans, that we wanted for our community. And so we thought, okay, so we have to go to the Board of Supervisors. Who's going to make sure that this gets done? And so for some reason, this strange voice came out of me. And I was the one, and it shocked me. And I was surprised. The Bayview district, there was a lot of history around environmental injustice. And the story about your son is really unfortunate. You shared it with me in the past. And it all, there's a bunch of public health issues for residents in the Bayview. Still.
And you want to speak to a few of those, like what some of those are? And
Well, racism is a real good tool. If you want to affect everything about a person's life, if you want to affect their health, their education, how they think, how they feel, you can do it through that tool. And that's what's been done. So I can speak to that. I mean, when you look at the educational system, when you look at the schools in the Bayview, how is it that they're still the same? How is it that the kids change? The teachers may change, but the system is the same. So those systematic racism is just an amazing tool. And that's what's been used against us. Health. How is it we still have people change? You still have the highest rate of asthma, highest rate of cancer. Why? Why is that? Why is it that you still have the highest rate of poverty? So it's a system. It's systematic.
Right.
And that's what is still facing the Bayview, even though, it's changing. Certainly, there are different people in the Bayview. I think it has a higher Asian population now than it does a Black population.
Yeah. I remember reading about that shift that the Black residents are no longer the majority in Bayview. Yeah, and a lot of those systemic racist issues, they affect they've affected many areas of Black life in the community, like what you said, for in education and public health and employment. And so, you know, before getting to know you, I knew about your deep focus on environmental issues. And what are some of the things that, you know, was this one of the things that you ran on, or was it something that you decided to dive deep on once you got elected?
No, I think it was always a part of it because, again, my son had cancer.
Right.
And so I didn't want any other mother's son to go through that. I thought, you know, you messed with the wrong mother's son. You messed with the wrong person here. Right. So I wanted to really do something and make a difference. Mm-hmm. And that power plant, 2 of them, where are they? Right. They're in Potrero Hill, and they're in Bayview. And so I wanted to get rid of those plants. And that's what that was my focus.
What was that like going up against, you know, something like that big industry that had those long roots? That was it was toxic to the community, but you went in and tried to fight it. What was that journey like?
Well, it was a lot of people with me, and that's what made the difference. You know, because I could turn around, look behind me, and see a whole lot of people. So I was not by myself. It was like collective leadership. We were working on this together. And it was Potrero Hill, which was really wonderful, and it was Bayview. It was all of us. We had a focus, and that was getting rid of those plants. So for me, I had a lot of help and a lot of people with me. And that's what spurred me on through, I think, 3 mayors. We kept fighting, and we eventually got rid of those plants.
And what was the catalyst to get rid of them? Like what happened?
Well, it was the hard work, and finally we just wore people down, and people started realizing it and looking at it, and things started to change. PG&E started people looking at them differently, and trying to find a solution. And certainly the health risks and issues could not go away. They stared people in the face. Yeah. So I think that's what helped it all. And we just brought a consciousness and a focus to it.
All right. What were some of the other major issues that you worked on while you
Shipyard. Shipyard was a big one because there's another issue with health and you know, and toxicity and all of that, and an opportunity for jobs and an opportunity for housing, but it had to be cleaned up. It was like an open sore, and you had to clean it up. You had to get rid of it. And people, you know, there was issues about how and who and what, but there was never an issue about it being cleaned up.
Yeah. You know my grandmother.
Yes, I do.
Dorothy
That's
Cook,
who we met. Yes.
And you know, she raised my sister and me on Oak Street.
Yeah.
But I went to Olivet on 3rd and Revere, and I went to Thurgood Marshall High School. So yes. I was out in the Bayview a lot. I was at Thurgood the day when the melee happened and the big fight broke out and all the police came to campus.
Yes.
And I know that safety in the neighborhood has historically been an issue. What was that like for you, being a supervisor at the time, working on that, seeing all that happen?
Well, I did some work on your grandmother's house. That's how we met.
Yeah, she sings your
as
praises.
An electrician, right?
She loves you. Yeah.
I think, you know, it was difficult. It was hard because, you know, you knew that the criminal justice system, they knew where these kids were. They had cameras on every corner. They knew where they hung out. They knew what was going to happen when, or that something would happen. And then we just fell right into it. It was just very heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking because young, beautiful young men who could be so much help to our city, so valuable. I mean, they had so much going for them, but then they were hurt and they had other issues. A lot of them were foster kids and they belonged to the city and we never treated them right. In fact, most of the kids in the juvenile system were foster. That means they belonged to the city. And they were taken away from their parents, young ages, during the crack epidemic. So there were a lot of issues there and mental health issues which never get talked about or thought about as far as our young Black men. And which is unfortunate because there's been a 60% rise in suicide among that group.
Right. Yeah.
60%. And so nobody seems to understand that they have mental health issues. And you get treated a certain way so long. And I think it certainly affects anybody and especially them.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the side effects of mental health have always sort of been discussed, but I feel like only recently it's been a high priority conversation, like the need to address historic trauma, immediate trauma. And you had mentioned all these other issues like education, employment, environment. And when all those things are impacting the community at once, we also didn't talk about like over policing, which happens in our city. We were like 6% of the population and 80% of the arrests, the Black community. And so it's like you had a very difficult job and you took on very difficult work, and I've always admired you for it. And I wanted to use this time to get some insights on like the lessons that you learned and the things that you saw while you were doing that work. Any broad ones you want to share?
Yeah, health. Health disparities among African Americans, and it crosses socioeconomic lines. So what is that about? What's about our health? This has been a very unhealthy city for for African Americans, spiritually, mentally, physically. There was a time I mentioned when we were more of a population, had community, had our doctors and people. It was different. It was very different. But now it's, again, you're falling into this trap where this racism and this lack of understanding is big, and it looms big over everything. Health. The disparities. And you've got Kaiser, and you've got UCSF, and you've got Stanford down the street, but it still exists. So what is that about? And is it conscious or unconscious or systematic, which means you don't even have to think about it. It just happens automatically. Yeah. So that's a big one for me, the health disparities. That's huge.
And I think it's important that you've remained committed to addressing these issues in a policy and political way. You're currently running for DCCC,
which is the Democratic County Central Committee, and runs the Democratic Party in San Francisco. And we always talk about those democratic values. Well, if we're going to talk about it, let's bring it to the table.
And so tell me a little about the race, where it's at, and how it's going.
Well, I'm working all the time, and I think it's important that San Franciscans understand that our local politics are important. But what happens at the state and what happens at the federal level is big. It's huge for us. And so basically I'm on the DCCC, but I'm working on those big issues. I'm working with resistance groups like Indivisible, Swing Left, Ladies of the Resistance, Democracy in Action, Sister District. I'm working with those people because they're doing state races all over the country. No matter what happens with this impeachment, we can change McConnell. We can get rid of some of these people, these Republicans. Or I should say some of the people that are not doing the best for the bulk of us. So I think we can make a change. And all politics are local, and people can get involved in their local politics and make phone calls and go to Manteca and Central Valley. That's where I was going, and it made a difference because we won back those seats from the Republicans. Yeah.
And that's one thing that I was going to speak to too, because we've talked a bunch, obviously outside of like this formal interview format, and you were telling me about the places that you drove to like knock on doors, and like you're very active. Yes. Can you speak to some of that, like what you've been doing recently? Before this race, you have to do your own race now, but in the last few years, during your term on DCCC, how active you've been in supporting some of the other candidates?
Well, we in 2018, we changed California from red in spots, even Southern California to blue. And that was being active, people making phone calls. They brought my friends in, they were texting, and people really feel like I made a difference. And you can make a difference. I mean, in one of our races, Josh Harder, and that was in Antigua in that area, he won by 164 votes. That's just how close it was.
Yeah.
And it's doable. I mean, when I look at Georgia and Stacey Abrams, they cheated. They cheated, or she could have won, you know. And we came so close, closer than ever before in Georgia. So I'm very optimistic about what's coming in 2020, and I think people have a different feeling now. They know that I think we've tried to get out that politics are local, and what you do on the local level affects every level. It affects the state. It affects the national level. So there's a lot that can be done always. I just refuse to be, I'm an optimistic person because I've seen it. I've seen so many changes. I mean, just in my lifetime, you know, Black people could not vote in the South. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, your age, or people think, oh, way back then. But no, it wasn't that far. Yeah. It really wasn't. And so there's a lot that we can do. And especially if we build coalitions with other people. I think it behooves us to understand that poor people have never been the problem, no matter where they come from. You know, people coming from Mexico, Guatemala, those people are not our problem, because they're not the problem. It's the wealthy and the rich and the imbalance that's always been the problem. So we need to get these people, grab them by the hand, and make coalitions. And what is good for us is good for them. All right. And we need to fight against families being mistreated and put in any kind of camps. That is not good for anybody. It's wrong. It's wrong. It was wrong when it was done to us, and it's wrong. And we need to speak out against that. Any injustice anywhere. African Americans have a duty and a responsibility to speak out against it. Yeah.
No, I agree, and you're definitely showing that, and how committed you've been to the political work and the community work, and you know, there's a I want to tell like this one story, the integrity that you bring to the work, the integrity that you bring to working together, even if there's a difference, there are people that aren't necessarily politically aligned, right? Because when I first started working in San Francisco, after I graduated from Williams, I mentioned I asked to shadow you for a day, and you let me sit in on the meetings that you were having. But that year, there was a vote for the president of the Board of Supervisors. Yes. And it was you against David Chu, who's now the state assembly person. Yes. And it went David Chu's way. And the response that you had after he won was just like incredibly gracious. It was like, I'm committed to support you to help build. I mean, what do you want to say? What happened?
No, but because it's all about the city, and once you realize what it's about, then you let that go because you have work to do. And if you take it personal, then it becomes something else. But if it's about the city, and you were committed to the city, then whoever takes the helm, you will work with them for the better goal of the city. And it just keeps it all pretty much level. You don't have to remember to hate anybody or not talking to this person and all that. You can forget all of that because once it's done, it's about the work of the city. And that's what you took, an oath to uphold and to do.
Yeah. Not everybody does that though, which is which is why I have to harp on how incredible it was to see because you were coming to the end of your term, and David Chu had just gotten elected. He was like brand new, right? So if you look at the experience aspect, you have more experience, and the type of community that you committed to, and the type of issues you could have brought forward. It was just like, it was hard for me to watch, right? But I learned a lot watching you, which is why whenever I think I told this to you also, whenever I'm really in a tight spot politically or I'm struggling with something, I always called you and Jeff Adachi. And Jeff, of course, is no longer with us, but that watching you in that moment really solidified that for me. Like, you were a person that I wanted to stay connected to, so I can have some clarity. I wouldn't be thinking in a reactionary way, and I can respond with dignity. And you set that example for me.
Well, thank you so much. Jeff Adachi, he said, or somebody was saying of him that, Jeff would have to defend these horrible people. And he felt that they were horrible. But then he felt, what brought them to this? Mm-hmm. How did they get this? How did they get to this place in their life? Mm-hmm. And that makes a big difference. That makes a big, huge difference for the person who has to defend them and for the person themselves, because you ask that next question, the why. And could it have been me? Mm-hmm. Could things have happened that I would be that way? So Jeff Adachi was and still is for me a model, mm-hmm. and somebody that I think about as well. Yeah.
You've also helped correct me when I've made mistakes.
Oh, good.
I remember one time that this is something I always do. I just, there's so much stuff that I want to talk to you about, and I actually wanted to get into some technology issues. We talked a lot about that also. And before I get into another story, how can people support your DCCC campaign before we let go of that?
Well, thank you. I think it's important for everybody to vote. Mm-hmm. And to understand, you got to go down ballot, which means you look at every single thing on the ballot. There's some judges that are running, and these mm-hmm. judges are important because I think we can make another change. We have people who used to be public defenders, and public defenders very seldom get selected as judges by the governor. Mm-hmm. But we have an opportunity. There are 3 women. Mm-hmm. And I think that's extremely important, as well as my choice, my candidate, Chesa Bodine. And I was just so happy that San Franciscans got it. Mm-hmm. They voted for him. Mm-hmm. And he had never prosecuted a case because he was a public defender, but now he's the head prosecutor. Mm-hmm. But people wanted something different. And I think it's important to look at your choices of candidates. And one way you do that is, what do you value? What's important to you? And you look at their body of work, and then you select that person that closely aligns with your body of work and with what you believe. Mm-hmm. So I hope people will do that with me, mm-hmm. and that I have shown through my body of work what I care about and what's important to me. And I hope it resonates with them and they vote for me.
Yeah, they should definitely vote for you.
Yeah, they should.
Yeah. And tell everyone that they know to vote for you. And the boundaries for the race is split up by assembly district, right? So
yeah, there's 17 and 19. 19 is like the west side, mm-hmm. And 17 is the east side. I'm not quite sure of the boundaries, but that's a homework assignment for people, mm-hmm. See but what you'll see is the people that you can vote for will be on the ballot.
Right.
And the ones that are on the other side will not be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you live in Assembly District 17, there are a slate of candidates that are running.
Yes.
Miss Sophie Maxwell is one of them.
Right. And that was like, thank you.
Yeah, and vote for her. Yeah. And then if people want to donate, how can they do that?
Well, they can go to, I'm not quite up yet, actually. I'm not
People
sure.
Power campaign.
Yeah. It's horrible, but I'm not quite ready for that yet. Okay. And I better hurry up, right? Because it's in a month.
It's coming up.
But keep looking for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
Yeah. Of course. So the story about when you reprimanded me. Well, it wasn't really like a reprimand. It kind of was, but it was an important lesson. Mm-hmm. So I was meeting you because I was talking about my campaign for school board, and I was waiting for you at a restaurant, and I was hungry, and I started eating food, and then do you remember this story?
I kind of.
Okay,
but I think you weren't late.
I was. I was late too.
Yeah, you were late.
Yeah. Okay, I was late.
I was waiting for you at the restaurant.
I was late. I ordered food and I didn't offer any food for you, and so it was like a very, very, my grandma taught me better than that, and you reminded me of that.
Well, that's good. You haven't done that again, right?
No, ma'am. And so I always, especially when I'm meeting with Black women, I always, I think about that lesson. And I don't know, I think it's just important to share that, it's important for young leaders trying to get started to pay attention to the impression that they're making.
Yes.
And to pay attention to the little things and how to treat people and to respect people's time. And most people, they would just sort of observe that and hold it against you and not give you an opportunity to improve it. Mm-hmm. And so in all these massive ways, you've been trying to make changes, and all these character ways you've been doing it too, which is, I think, speaks to the full breadth of like how much you care about helping people move forward. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to acknowledge you and tell you thank you for that also.
Well, thank you. Thank you for getting the lesson. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so people should know this, but if somebody wants me to listen, they got to call. And then I'll listen. But I listen to a lot of people. And so you have this race coming up. You're also, one of the things I wanted to get into before we sort of like wrap this up is how the healthy lifestyle that you live. Mm-hmm. You're very active. What's some of the things that you do to stay active?
Well, I love my bike. I ride my bike a lot of places, and I do Pilates twice a week, and I'm at the lake every day at 6:00 with a group of people. And I've been a vegetarian for at least 50 years, and so I'm very aware of what I take in. And how I manage my intake. Sometimes it gets away from me because I love sugar. Oh my God. I can eat cakes and pies and cookies just all the time without, but.
What's your favorite cakes and pies?
I think, apple is one of my favorites, pumpkin and any kind of cake. I'm not too much with a lot of frosting and stuff, but cookies.
Yeah.
I mean, that stuff just gets good to you. You know what I mean? It's like, they put something in. Sugar is addictive, and I call myself a sugarholic. So I am trying to be very careful. But getting into something else that we were talking about, and that is the tech.
Yes.
The tech. It's extremely, to me, important that people understand that how things have shifted, how we are doing the work that when you go to the bank, you used to go to the bank and there used to be a teller who had a job and used to help you, but now you do it. You do all the work yourself. When you're making a ticket, an airline ticket, you do the work. You carry your bags. You do everything.
Right.
Tickets have not gone down. I think it's important to understand that tech can be very helpful and very useful. But then we have to remember that those who are doing and driving this tech, it's not about people. It's about money.
Right.
Because if it were about people, it would be wonderful to have a robot that in hospitals that could help lift patients up, and not nurses do it. There's a lot of things they could do. They could have grocery robots that could meet you at the bottom of the stairs, for seniors and carry the groceries up, or conveyors. There's so many things they could do to help people. And so we've got to be aware of that. Nowadays, even working for the city, you can't take your application anywhere. The first thing that looks at your application is a computer. So you have to know that language or you don't get to the next system.
Right.
It's a computer system. And then you get to the next system. If you're doing insurance, you have to know how to talk to a computer when you call your insurance company, because if you start a narrative, you have to say, yep, nope, but, like that to get to the next system and maybe to get to eventually a person.
Right.
So these systems are things that we have to be aware of, because who is programming the systems and who are they programming them for? And that means whose language are they programming them for? Right. Whose experiences are they programming them for? And in the city, it's an issue. And working with some friends now, we're looking at the state and status of Black and brown women in San Francisco. And yes, they're employed, but where? Where on the ladder are they employed? Very much at the bottom.
Right.
And how do they get through these systems? And how do they get through these people? And so we're working on that and working with the mayor, and she's very much interested in how we do things. And the systems that we get for, human resources. Mm-hmm. Oh, this system is just great and it does all these things. Yes, but what else does it do? And we need to make sure that we look into that, because there's a third party that can look into the biases. Mm-hmm. And we hear over and over about those biases, and they are real. Mm-hmm. So we have to be very careful in this tech time. And when they call it artificial intelligence, the only thing man that I can see has ever created was tools. Right. You don't partner with your car to go shopping. Mm-hmm. You use it. Mm-hmm. You don't partner with your phone. You use the phone. That's the same thing with this technology. You don't partner with AI or artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. It is a tool, and you use it for that. And the more and more they talk about this and try to pretend that it's anything more than that, we have to understand it is not. It is a tool. Mm-hmm. And the tool should be useful for mankind, to make mankind better. Europe is doing a great job. I mean, to a certain extent, they have rules and regulations. We have nothing in this country.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that back up, because we have had more extended conversations about the impact of technology and the things related to facial recognition. And you knew that. I mean, you've supported Mission Bit, the organization that I ran for 4.5 years,
coding.
and we taught coding across the Bay Area. And one of the points that you made during one of our conversations that I actually hadn't considered was that the prices of things haven't gone down, but it's cheaper for companies to do things with technology.
Yes.
And we're basically paying companies to do the work ourselves.
Yes.
Like the food isn't cheaper at Safeway.
No.
And we go to the self-checkout line. You get,
hello.
We bag our own groceries. We pay for the food. And we haven't seen the cost benefit as a customer. And it's like that in several different aspects. And so I was like, man, that's true. It was.
Yeah. And these, what was really smart, I thought, is that Local 2, which is the hotel workers, mm-hmm. they put it in their contract mm-hmm. about technology. And I have a friend who was she was in Virginia, and I don't remember the hotel, but she'd forgotten her toothbrush. So she called down, and they said, okay, they said, I think a robot or somebody will bring it up. She gets a knock at the door, and there's R2-D2. I'm just calling it R2-D2 because it's a robot. Mm-hmm. Comes to the door, and it comes into the room, and it says, open this, press this button. She opens it, and this cavity comes, and her toothbrush and toothpaste are in it. So she reaches in, and then it says, are you satisfied with my job? Press this button. And then and it told her its name, and then it promptly turned around and left.
Wow, this happened in Virginia.
Yeah, and then she was in another place, probably the same hotel chain, same thing. Mm-hmm. So they are there, and that's why Local 2, put it in their contract mm-hmm. that even when, and this is constantly happening because these, chains and hotels are contracting with maybe Stanford and asking them about, making something that can do this.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I actually, I sat down with a company that moved out here. They wanted to talk to me about the little robot that they had. And I think it's called Pepper. They mm-hmm. called it Pepper or something like mm-hmm. that. And they have it in different hotels in different areas, mm-hmm. and you talk to it and gives you recommendations or whatever.
Yes.
But they did a little demo in the conference room we were in, and they were trying to show it that it could it could do facial recognition. Mm-hmm. And so it read the programmer's face, who was white. And then when it looked at me, it was like not registering. Mm-hmm. Like it couldn't tell who I was or,
yes.
And so.
And we have to be careful because mm-hmm. where does it get our faces from? Probably jails. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. Because that's where the most Black men, they get their faces from jails, and Black women. And so mm-hmm. there you go. So you could be identified as somebody because you are profiled with somebody that's in prison or jail. I mean, so there's so many things that we have to be very conscious and aware of, and there are more and more that are going to be looking a certain way because they're non-threatening. So they're all going to be very light. You know, if you see a personal one, it's going to be light, probably with blonde hair and kind of light eyes, because that's so-called less threatening to some people. And that is a part of continuing with the racism. It is not a neutral system.
Right.
And so we have to be aware. And I think that they definitely have great, and they've made my life better. I mean, the computer and the phone is very convenient, but like anything else, we have to just be aware of what it is, because a lot of times it's done for a different reason, like money.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that the robot not reading my face highlighted was that it's not being designed with us in mind. So they're probably using a bunch of different people's faces. They're not thinking about, oh, let's do a whole bunch of scans of how it can read, darker complexions. And so, I mean, it emphasizes the need for diversity in tech, which, we talked about on this podcast with guests in the past, but it needs to be also emphasized in how we create policy. And in San Francisco today, I would say that not enough of our policies that are more progressive policies have enough of an equity lens. And so when we talk about housing, right, and we talk about homelessness, one of the two things that I know you're an expert on, you can speak a lot to about what the city has tried to do, what's worked, what hasn't worked. One of the frustrations for me around the housing discussion is that when we hone in on affordability, we take the conversation away from ownership. And for Black families, I mean, a lot of our net worth was wiped out in the Great Recession, right? And historically, Black families were able to buy here, and it's how a lot of Americans build their personal worth is in home ownership. But a lot of the conversation about how to keep people of color in San Francisco is about affordable housing, and that's problematic for me. It doesn't have enough of that ownership aspect to it. What would you say to that? Well,
I think you're right. I don't know, in this kind of economy, things are changing as far as home ownership, but wealth. But what hasn't changed is you do build wealth through home ownership. And for African Americans, our home ownership in the last 50 years has gone down. We have less home ownership now than we did 50 years ago.
Right.
And so that has to do with jobs, economy, but lending. And so part of reparations, as far as I'm concerned, should be a part of that lending, because they kept us from building wealth. Right. They made it more difficult for us to build wealth. So, and they're continuing to do it. So as I've said before, the bill is still going up. And that's where we need to think, however home ownership is these days, whether it's a condo, whether it's apartment, whatever it is, we need to be able to do that. We need to be able to build wealth.
Yeah,
for absolutely. Our children, for our families, and stability.
Right. Yeah.
That's how you grow families. That's how you grow a stable city. I don't know what our future in the city is going to be like, anybody's future in the city, because I don't know what's been other than housing, but who's deciding that? And what kind of housing? Are we building housing that you can grow in, that families can grow in? A lot of people grew up in apartments. It's not the worst thing in the world, but can you grow in that apartment? Are you building it so it's cheap, 500 square feet? Or are you building it so it can be flexible space? They're doing it in Canada.
Yeah, that's one of the major issues I want to get into, like our below market rate program. It's maybe like you have to income qualify. It's like 500 square feet for $300,000. If you go on the open rate, it's the same place for like 700,000, 500 square feet. And as culturally, like, we have families, and culture and realistically, because of the displacement, our families are sort of across the Bay Area. So we use cars to get to them, and the city's policies around like discouraging driving. And you're an avid biker, right? Like you believe in using public transit and biking and all of that. But
sometimes you need a car, especially, you know what? When you live out in Bayview, when you live in Sunnydale,
right.
And that's another thing. See, Sunnydale is beautiful. I mean, if you're there, like when the kids get out of school, they're running all around and yelling and screaming and running up the hills and running in between the houses. It's open. You know, it's an open and it's a family place. Right. And it's different kinds of families. There's Asian families, there's Samoan families, there's Latinx families, there's Black families. But there's families there. That's where they are. Right. There are more children there than probably anywhere else in the city. But now they want to build 5-story buildings and put them in there and then redo the public housing and have that different. You know what I mean? And so I'm just concerned about that because the housing developments, and I don't call it public housing. I mean, I know about public restrooms and public parks, but what's a public house? You know? So this housing, a lot of people work every day that live in Sunnydale housing developments and Potrero Hill housing developments and Bayview housing developments. And they've always worked every day. And so these days it's workforce housing and it can be called affordable housing. But all of a sudden they want to redo it and put these people in something like the Pink Palace or something, you know, or Geneva Towers. And then the elevators stop working. And then what happens? And then when you look, you don't see kids around there. So we need to think about that. We need to think about what we're doing, the mistakes we've made in different places, and how people are faring in those places, how families are faring and children.
Yeah. And I think it's important. I mean, when you have policymakers at the table that they're culturally relevant, they have to think about, what our families need. If the city's going to be serious about keeping and growing a Black community here, it has to be thinking about lending the types of housing that we're building and how to accommodate families that we know come with very rich cultures and certain needs if they're going to really be seriously rooted here. So
yes, and to say that your grandson who just got out of jail can't live with you. I mean, that's how I grew up with. I never knew a day without my grandmother. Right. My grandmother was there, my mother was there, my sisters and my brothers. We were all together, and that's how we were able to move on and buy other property, and because we were together. And so we need to rethink that policy and not just go with that, but rethink it because it's not family building. Yeah. It's not, you don't build families. You never knew a day without, you had your grandmother and your mother and all these people that you could live with. Well, suppose you couldn't live with them. Right. Suppose they were in a place where they couldn't have kids. Yeah. Couldn't spend the night. Couldn't get away for a minute.
Yeah, that's very real for our families. And our home that my grandmother lives in was bought by her father, my great grandfather, Luther Harris, and he bought it in 1947. Wow! And it's still in the family, and it's been that home base for all of us. She had 5 children. She has like 11 grandchildren. I think you all stayed there.
Yeah, that's right.
at some point. And I actually, that's a good transition to how I wanted to close this out because I started a consulting practice and I named it after my great grandfather. It's called the Luther Harris Holding Company. Wow. And so I wanted to close this out talking about leadership and legacy. So I'll get back to my great grandfather in a minute, but you're obviously, I think you're one of the, you're a celebrated and honored leader for me in the city of San Francisco. And I think a lot of us feel that way, which is why we keep voting for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Do you have any guiding principles when it comes to leadership?
Yes, I do. I believe that whoever has the ball at the time is the leader. And sometimes your job is to give them the resources they need to lead. And that means collective leadership. So when you look behind you, there's somebody there all around you. Because there's nothing like being a leader and the only person you're leading is yourself. And also that our leaders are who people choose, not who every Black minister or preacher is a leader. I always say, well, is every priest a Irish leader or whatever? You know? So I think leadership has to be shared. And it has to be, especially these days, nobody wants there's no one person anymore. People want to be a part of that. And that's what I think is important to remember, that you are a part of something. And if you choose to go into public service, you're a public servant. And I always say that to people, a politician, I said, public servant, to remind myself, I'm a public servant. And I have to conduct myself in a certain way. And I can't go just anywhere and act just any old way, because I represent people. And when you ask people to vote for you, you're taking them with you wherever you go. And they know your schedule. I remember I was at the bank, I was running a little late, and I had a committee meeting. It was at 10 o'clock. And I wasn't going to be late for it, but I was just kind of running late. And so I wanted to stop at the bank. So I went in this bank, and this man said, he looked at me and he looked at his watch and he said, don't you have a committee meeting? Oh, you're Supervisor Maxwell. What? I said, he said, don't you have a committee meeting? And I said, yes. He said, and then he told everybody in the line, and they let me go because he knew my schedule. He knew who I was, where I was supposed to be. So that's really how it is. In San Francisco, we don't have movie stars. We have public servants, and people are aware of who you are, what you're doing, and what you say. And you can be riding in your car thinking, and they'll look at you and go, oh, and say, smile. And I'm thinking, I don't feel like smiling. I got to make this vote. So I think that people are aware, and you need to be aware that you've taken on a responsibility of leadership, and people elected you and they selected you. And so they're looking at you and they're expecting you to understand that and keep them in mind.
Yeah.
When you do things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even when you say things.
Yeah. Yes. I agree.
Yes, as a public official.
Right,
what do you think?
Well, you have you've told me those things before, and I've kept them in mind.
Good.
So legacy. So I mentioned my great grandfather, Luther Harris. He came out here from Prescott, Arkansas, with a 6th grade education. Bought properties for him and all of his children at a time, when it was hard for Black folk to do much of anything in the country. This is his dictionary.
Wow.
These are my great grandmother's chairs.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And so when his legacy is important to me, and it helps inform how I think about my legacy. Your family's legacy is very much solidified in San Francisco. But how do you think about legacy in general, and then your legacy?
Well, I always tell my grandson, I always tell him about his name. I said, you have a name to carry, and it's important how you carry that name. Your father's name and your people. We are your people. And how do you use that? And my cousin said to me, Sophie, how are you going to use your mother's name? She wasn't dead or anything. He just said, so what are you going to do? How are you going to, in the world, how are you going to use this name and what she's built up, this name that means something? So I think that the names, we have to carry those family names and understand of how we conduct ourselves and whatever it is that you do. If your legacy is to be the best garbage man, and that's an honorable job, then you be the best of that. And you be, you're so-and-so's grandson? Oh, I knew him because it's not about what you do, it's about who you are and the legacy and the family name that you carry, and that you realize that it means something. It means a lot, because people may not know you. For me, people didn't know me, but they knew my mother. You Miss Maxwell's daughter? Well, I know Miss Maxwell will not let you do so and so and so. And that's what made the difference for me. That's what made the difference, because there were many, many candidates, and a lot of them had a lot more money than it. I ran my campaign from my home, from my house. Right. So it was about that name. It's about what it meant. So it's your legacy and the one that you continue in the legacy that you want to have, because you can always make your own legacy. It doesn't have to be what happened in the past or somebody else's. It can be yours. You can start right now from this day and decide the legacy you're going to have. You can look at other people and say, I want to be like that. That's going to be my legacy. So a legacy is something that you, as you mentioned, my legacy that you can determine and decide. And I want mine to be one of openness, one of integrity and love and understanding. But I think the most important is love. That people know that you deep down when they meet you, they feel that from you, because that's an armor and it protects you from a lot of things. Keeps you open, keeps you smiling. And as you age, ask me, it helps with the wrinkles.
It
helps with the wrinkles.
Well, I think like you've aged wonderfully.
Well, thank you. Yeah,
and that's why I wanted to talk about the health stuff.
That's right, because what's the alternative, right?
Miss Maxwell, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and you really make me proud. And thank you so much. I know your grandmother, your great grandfather, and are very proud of what you've done and how you've honored them with what you've done with your life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Certainly, anytime.
Peace, and thank you for listening to another episode of Cook on Monday Morning. It was really awesome to have Miss Maxwell, Sophie Maxwell, on today's podcast. Her experience working in the city, working on behalf of its residents, and making changes in a positive way for all San Franciscans is, really inspiring to me. She is a person that I've constantly sought advice from. I hope you learned a lot about her story, how she thinks about leadership and the change that she wants to make on the DCCC. I hope you'll support her campaign for DCCC as well. I'd like to thank her for coming on today's podcast. I'd like to thank the people that made this podcast possible. David Topete, my videographer and producer. Fernando Cinco Marquez for the editing that he does for the newsletter. I'd like to thank all the people that have subscribed and commented on the podcast on YouTube. We're growing. We're on this road to get to 2,020 subscribers by April 30th of 2020. You're making that possible. I deeply appreciate your support, you sharing what we're doing here, and the positive feedback that you've given me about how this is helping affect and improve your Monday morning. Because at Cook on Monday Morning, we believe that if you own Monday morning, you can own the week. If you change your week, you can change your year. And if you change your year, you'll change your life. I like to just end this podcast by thanking all the people that make San Francisco run, our teachers, our janitors, our school lunch workers, our muni drivers, the people that keep our streets safe, our first responders, the people that keep our streets clean. Thank you. This podcast is for you. This city is what it is because of you, and I deeply appreciate you. I'm your biggest fan. I also like to just extend a note of appreciation and a desire to build community to the people in cities like Oakland, LA, Houston, Dallas, New Orleans, Chicago, Philadelphia, DC, New York, Miami, Detroit, anyone, anywhere that is committed to improving themselves and their community. It starts by what we do here on Monday morning. If you are interested in getting in touch with me related to the work that I do at the Luther Harris Holding Company, you can reach out to me at stevoncook.com. It's a consulting practice. We do brand awareness, strategic advising, and we help companies become more socially responsible through community initiatives. So if any of that is of interest to you, please reach out to me, info@stevoncook.com. You can also reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Stevon Cook. Let us know how we're doing. We look forward to hearing from you. We look forward to building with you. And until next week, peace, and we out.